The world of Tarkalon was a scarred place, where shattered glass towers of forgotten cities rose like black teeth against the sky. In the valleys between them, forests grew wild and thick, their roots clutching the ruins of old machines that hummed faintly with power no one understood anymore. They called it the Age After Ashes, when both magic and lost science coexisted uneasily, their remnants shaping the lives of all who survived. In the shadow of these ruins, a boy named Cale Thorne lived alone. He was barely 15, lean and restless, with hair the color of storm ash and eyes too sharp for his age. Orphaned during a raid on the wandering caravans that had once been his family, Cale had learned to live by snaring wild game and scavenging forgotten tech from the skeletons of the old world. The villagers of Nera Hollow knew him only as the Stray. They feared his sharp tongue, his quick hands, and the strange affinity he seemed to have with the ancient relics scattered across the land. Yet Cale never sought their approval. The forest of broken echoes, with its whispering shadows and vines that glowed faintly blue at night, was his true home. One evening, as twilight bled crimson over the shattered towers on the horizon, Cale heard a sound that made him freeze, a cry, low but heavy with pain. It came from deeper in the forest, near a ruined bridge of rusted steel where the river Ryel thundered. Instinct told him to run. The forest was home to things far worse than beasts. But the cry came again, weaker this time, almost swallowed by the roar of water. "Damn it," Cale muttered, gripping the short blade strapped to his belt. He moved swiftly, leaping over moss-covered slabs of concrete until he reached the source. There, sprawled against the twisted roots of a fallen tree, was a man clad in battered armor unlike any Cale had ever seen. The plates shimmered faintly, not like forged steel but like woven light, cracked and sputtering where blood seeped through. A great sword lay half-buried in the earth beside him, humming with an unnatural energy. The man's face was pale beneath the grime, his jaw clenched, his breaths ragged. He tried to rise when he saw Cale, but collapsed again with a groan. "Stay back!" the man rasped, his voice carrying the weight of command even in weakness. "The shadows, they followed me." Kyle's eyes darted around. The forest was unnaturally still. No wind, no birds, just silence, thick and wrong. "I'm not leaving you," Kyle said stubbornly, stepping closer. "You don't understand," the man whispered. "If they find me, all will be lost." Kyle knelt, ignoring the warning. He had patched wounds before, on himself, on wild animals snared in his traps, but never on a stranger who looked like he had stepped out of one of the legends whispered around campfires. As Cale tore cloth from his own tunic to bandage the bleeding, he noticed an emblem burned into the man's armor, a broken crown surrounded by flame. His breath caught. He had seen it before, etched on the cracked murals of the ruins of Valeran Keep. The mark of the Knights of Egros, the guardians of the fallen kingdom. But they were supposed to be extinct, wiped out in the last war over 100 years ago. "You're supposed to be dead," Cale blurted. The man's eyes opened, sharp despite the haze of pain. "I am Sir Dareth Vaynar, last of the Egros, and if I die here, the kingdom dies with me." Before Cale could reply, a sound like cracking stone shivered through the trees. Shadows peeled away from the trunks, gathering into forms that were not human, not beast, but something in between. Creatures of dark smoke wrapped around shards of glowing metal, remnants of machines fused with curses. Their eyes burned with sickly green fire. "Void spawn," Dareth hissed, trying to rise. His sword pulsed as if eager for battle, but his strength failed. Kyle's heart hammered, fear clawing at his throat. He had no magic, no great weapon, just a worn blade and too much stubbornness. "Run," Dareth commanded, but Kyle shook his head. "Not without you." The shadows shrieked, advancing. Kyle tightened his grip on his blade, standing between them and the wounded knight. For the first time in his lonely, wandering life, Kale felt something spark inside him. A fire that refused to yield, even in the face of doom. "Then we fight," he whispered. The forest erupted in chaos. The first shadow creature lunged, its body rippling like smoke bound in rusted chains. Kyle swung his short blade, but it passed through the thing's torso as though slicing mist. The creature shrieked, its clawed arms slamming into him and hurling him against a moss-covered slab of concrete. Pain seared his ribs, but the boy scrambled back up, spitting blood. "They can't be killed by steel," Dareth croaked from behind him, gripping the earth as he struggled to rise. "My sword! Bring me my sword!" Kyle's eyes darted to the massive weapon lying half-buried in the soil. It was unlike any blade he had ever seen. Translucent and radiant, its edge humming with light that seemed alive, flickering with sparks of energy like captured lightning. But the sword was enormous, too heavy for him. "Go!" Dareth shouted as another shadow stalked closer. Kyle sprinted, diving across the ruined ground as a claw swiped past his face. He seized the hilt with both hands and nearly collapsed under its weight. The sword was dense, vibrating as though it resisted him. "Bring it!" Dareth demanded. But Kale, struggling to lift it, heard something else. A low thrum, a whisper in his bones. The sword pulsed, and light crawled across its surface, responding not to the night, but to him. "What are you waiting for?" Dareth roared. Kyle turned, gritting his teeth, and swung the blade clumsily at the nearest shadow. Instead of passing through like his iron dagger, the sword erupted with light. The creature shrieked as its smoky form tore apart, dissolving in a blast of sparks. Both Kale and Dareth froze. "Impossible," the knight whispered. But there was no time to think. The other shadows rushed them. Kale swung again and the sword moved with strange momentum, as if guiding his hands. Light flared, tearing through the void spawn. One after another they disintegrated into black dust that scattered into the wind. The forest grew still once more. Kyle stood trembling, chest heaving, the glowing sword humming in his grip. Slowly the light dimmed until the blade seemed to grow heavier, nearly dragging him to the ground. He dropped it, panting, and stared at his shaking hands. Dareth forced himself upright, leaning on a shattered root. His gaze burned with disbelief. "The sword of living light. It chose you." Kyle blinked. "Chose me? I just swung it." "No," Dareth said firmly. "That blade, Oralis, is not a weapon that obeys the unworthy. It is the last relic of the Egros, forged in the age when light itself was bound into steel. It should answer only to its knight." Kale frowned. "Then why did it answer to me?" The knight stared at him for a long moment, as though weighing truths too heavy to speak. Finally he said, "Because the kingdom is not finished with you, boy." Kale's instinct was to laugh, but the memory of the sword's fire still trembled in his bones. "I'm no knight. I'm a nobody, an orphan who steals bread from market stalls. You've got the wrong person." "There is no mistake," Dareth said grimly. He coughed, blood staining his lips. "But if you doubt, then help me reach Valarin Keep, the last stronghold. There we will know the truth." Kyle hesitated, staring back toward the village lights barely visible in the distance. He had spent his whole life being unwanted there. The villagers would never welcome him back. But this path, following a wounded knight to a keep buried in the ruins of the old world, felt even more dangerous. "Why me?" Kyle muttered. "Because you saved me when no one else would," Dareth said. His voice was weak but steady. "And because only the courageous can bear Oralis. You have already proven yourself." Kyle swallowed, torn between fear and a strange, fierce pride he didn't want to admit. At last, he sighed and grabbed the knight's arm, helping him stand. "Fine. But if this kills me, I'm haunting you." Dareth managed a faint smile. "That's the spirit of an Egros." As they began their slow trek deeper into the forest of broken echoes, unseen eyes glimmered in the dark, watching. The shadows had been only scouts. Far greater dangers stirred, and news of the sword's awakening would soon spread beyond the forest, into deserts of glass and mountains of steel. The boy and the knight walked together, unaware that their fates, and the fate of the shattered kingdom, had just been bound by light. The forest of broken echoes ended abruptly where the land cracked open into a vast expanse of desolation. Kyle and Dareth stood at its edge, gazing upon the desert of shattered mirrors, a wasteland of endless glass dunes glittering beneath the harsh sun. Once, long ago, a great city of crystal towers had stood here, until it was obliterated in the War of Sundering. The heat of that ancient blast had fused the sands into sheets of glass that reflected the sky in broken, shifting patterns. Cale shielded his eyes. "We're going into that?" Dareth leaned heavily on his arm, his breath ragged, but his tone iron. "Valarin Keep lies beyond the desert. The road is hard, but there is no other path." Kyle scowled. "No other path except death, maybe." The knight's faint smile returned. "The desert kills the careless, not the determined." So they began their crossing. Each step crunched over sharp edges of fused glass. The heat shimmered, and mirages danced across the horizon, shapes of towers, ships, and figures that vanished the moment Cale blinked. At night, the dunes glowed faintly with a pale inner light, as if they remembered the fire that had created them. On the second day, Kyle's water flask ran dry. He said nothing, but Dareth noticed. Despite his own weakness, the knight broke a shard of crystal, and whispered words Cale did not understand. The shard bled droplets of water into Cale's flask. Cale's jaw dropped. "You can do that?" "Once," Dareth said grimly. His hand trembled as though the act had cost him dearly. "Light is not endless, boy. Use it unwisely, and it consumes you." Kyle nodded, uneasy. He was beginning to realize that the knight's strength was failing faster than either of them would admit. By the third night, they were not alone. Cale awoke to the sound of soft crunches in the glass dunes. He sat up, dagger in hand. Shadows moved in the distance, not the formless horrors of the forest, but human silhouettes. They wore masks fashioned from mirror shards, reflecting starlight in fractured beams. "Glassborn," Dareth whispered, pulling Oralis close. "Who?" "Scavengers, nomads cursed by the desert. They take what they need, and what they desire." As if on cue, one of the figures called out, his voice distorted by the shard mask. "Travelers, you carry light. Surrender it, and we may let you leave with your skins." Kyle gripped his dagger tighter. "I'm really starting to hate this world." Dareth rose unsteadily, leaning on Cale's shoulder for balance. "We seek no quarrel," he called. "Let us pass, and you need not bleed tonight." The masked figures laughed, the sound like shards scraping together. "We want the sword. The boy, too. He shines brighter than he knows." Cale froze. How did they know about him? The Glassborn surged forward, a dozen of them. Their weapons were jagged blades of mirrored glass that caught the moonlight like fire. Kyle instinctively reached for Oralis, but the sword burned his hands as though testing him again. Still, when he swung, light blazed forth, scattering two of the raiders instantly. The others faltered, hissing. "Take it!" one shouted. "Take the relic!" The desert erupted in chaos. Kyle fought clumsily, driven more by desperation than skill, but the sword guided his movements. Sparks of light carved through mirrored blades. Yet for every raider struck down, more closed in. Beside him, Dareth fought with grim precision, his armor cracked, his strength failing, but his will unbroken. Still, Cale saw the truth. The night would not last long. Then, unexpectedly, a voice cut through the battle. "Enough!" The raiders froze. From the dunes emerged a tall woman draped in desert robes, her mask different from the others, smooth, flawless, a single mirror reflecting all. She carried no weapon, but her presence alone silenced her warriors. "Who are you?" Dareth demanded, blood on his lips. The woman studied Kyle, her voice calm and resonant. "I am Serenia of the Glassborn, seer of the dunes. That sword does not belong to you, knight. It belongs to the boy." Kyle staggered back. "What do you mean?" Serenia's mirrored mask tilted toward him. "The desert speaks. It remembers the old fire, the shattered age, and it whispers of you, child of ruin. You are not what you think you are." Dareth's grip tightened on Oralis. "He is no pawn for your riddles." But Kale couldn't shake the chill in his chest. The way she said it, it felt like truth, raw and dangerous. Serenia raised a hand. The Glassborn lowered their blades but did not retreat. "Go, boy, cross the desert. But remember, every mirror shows a different face. You will soon see your own, and you may not like it." Without another word she turned, and the Glassborn melted into the dunes like fragments of a dream. Kale stood trembling, the sword humming faintly in his hands. "Why did she let us go?" he whispered. Dareth's eyes narrowed. "Because destiny has already claimed you, and even the cursed fear to stand in its way." They continued their march across the endless dunes. Yet Kale could not shake the feeling that the desert itself had looked into him, and that it had seen something he was not ready to face. The dunes of glass slowly gave way to jagged stone. By the seventh day of travel, Kale and Dareth reached the foothills of the Iron Mountains, a colossal range where peaks glowed faintly red from veins of molten ore running like rivers inside the stone. The air here was different, heavy, metallic, humming with the echoes of machines buried deep beneath the rock. Kale stared upward. "Mountains shouldn't glow." "They were mined in the time before ashes," Dareth explained, leaning on his sword for support. "The ancients carved so deep, they woke fire beneath the world. Now the mountains burn from within." Kale wrinkled his nose. "Sounds like a perfect place to die." Despite the grim humor, both of them knew the real danger lay not in the heat, but in what dwelled here. Legends spoke of forged behemoths, constructs left behind when the old cities fell, giant machines that once served as weapons, now wandering aimlessly, their minds shattered. The path was narrow, winding between cliffs of ironstone. Each step rang like a hammer strike, as though the mountain itself was a forge. They passed rusted skeletons of machines half buried in rock, enormous arms with clawed hands, eyeless heads cracked open, wires spilling like veins. Kyle could not resist touching one. The metal was cold, but as his fingers brushed it, the ruin shuddered faintly, and a ripple of blue light passed through the cracks. "Don't!" Dareth warned sharply. Kyle jerked his hand back. "I didn't do anything." "These relics hunger for power," the knight said grimly. "They sense Oralis. They sense you." The boy tightened his grip on the sword's hilt. More and more he felt it pulling at him, whispering in the back of his mind like a voice just out of hearing. It was not just a weapon. It was alive. By the second day in the mountains, trouble found them. They reached a narrow gorge where iron pillars jutted from the ground like broken teeth. As they crossed, a rumble echoed above. Kyle looked up and froze. A colossal shape moved between the peaks. A machine, towering like a fortress on legs, its body made of corroded steel and burning cogs. One arm ended in a blade longer than a ship, the other in a massive claw. Its single eye, cracked and glowing red, swept across the gorge. "A forged behemoth," Dareth said quietly, his hand tightening on Oralis. "Stay low." The machine's head turned, its eye fixing on them. A sound like 1,000 grinding gears erupted as it let out a mechanical roar. Kyle's blood went cold. "I think it sees us." The behemoth lurched forward, each step shaking the ground. Boulders rained from the cliffs. Kale and Dareth scrambled, dodging falling stone as the construct raised its massive claw. "Run!" Dareth barked. They sprinted along the gorge as the claws slammed down, shattering the path behind them. Kyle stumbled, nearly falling into the chasm, but Dareth dragged him onward. Ahead, the gorge narrowed to a crack in the cliffs. "In there!" Kale gasped. They dove into the crevice as the behemoth's blade arm crashed down, slicing the stone where they had stood. Dust and sparks filled the air. Inside the crack, darkness swallowed them. The sound of the behemoth rumbled outside, pacing, its metallic roar echoing like thunder. Kale leaned against the wall, gasping. "We can't fight that thing." "Not yet," Dareth agreed, grim but calm. "But mark my words, boy, this is no accident. The behemoths were drawn to us. Someone awakens them." Kale swallowed. "The glass-born seer?" "Perhaps," Dareth said. His face was pale, his wound worse, yet his eyes burned with fire. Or worse, someone who wants the sword. Someone who knows it has returned. Kyle's hands trembled on Oralis's hilt. He wanted to deny it, to say this wasn't his burden. But deep down, he knew the knight was right. Ever since he had picked up the sword, the world itself seemed to notice him. They pressed deeper into the crevice. It opened into a cavern lit by glowing veins of molten rock. In the center stood something neither boy nor knight expected. A throne of black iron, and seated upon it, a figure. The man was clad in half-rusted armor fused with machine parts. His face was hidden by a mask of polished steel, his voice a blend of human tone and mechanical distortion. "Welcome, travelers," the figure said, rising slowly. "I have been waiting." Kale instinctively raised the sword. What are you?" The figure stepped forward, his movements heavy and deliberate. "I am Varos the Bound, once general of the Egros. Now, something else. The behemoths answer to me. And that blade in your hand," his voice sharpened, mechanical tones crackling, "belongs to me." Kale's heart thundered. He looked at Dareth, but the knight's expression was grim, almost broken. "No," Dareth whispered. "Varos, you were dead." "Not dead," the masked figure growled, his eye slits burning crimson. "Remade, abandoned by the kingdom I bled for. But now the sword will return to its rightful master." He raised a massive gauntlet, and outside, the behemoth roared in answer. Kale felt the sword burn in his hand, its light flaring as if in defiance. For the first time he realized the truth. This was not just a journey. It was a war, and he had already chosen a side. The iron cavern shook with the roar of the behemoth outside. Varos the Bound stood before the black throne, half man, half machine, his voice grinding as if spoken through broken pipes. He stepped forward, every movement sparking against the floor. His burning gaze fixed on the boy. "Stranger, you were never meant to be chosen." The sword made a mistake. Kale tightened his grip on Oralis, silver light spilling between his fingers like flame. "The sword didn't make a mistake. It chose me." Varos laughed, harsh and mechanical, like gears locking. "No, it stole you. The sword is alive, yes, but it seeks only a vessel. You are an empty shell. His voice thundered. "I am the rightful heir. I bled beside the knights of Egros when the kingdom fell. My blood, not yours." Dareth's weak but steady voice cut through. "You were my brother in arms, Varos, but you bound yourself to cursed iron. You betrayed the oath." Varos turned, red light flaring from his mask. "Betrayed? No. I was abandoned. The kings left me to be torn apart by the dark. While others died heroes, I reforged myself in these mountains, in fire and machine. And now I will take what I was denied." His voice rose into a metallic snarl. "The sword! Or your lives!" At his command, movement stirred in the cracks. Not smoke this time, but twisted shapes of metal fused with ghostly essence, floating arms of steel, skulls lit with green fire, drifting like carrion birds, an army of iron wraiths. Kyle stepped back, fear hammering in his chest. "Dareth, we can't fight this many." The knight closed his eyes briefly, then reopened them with grim resolve. "Numbers don't matter. What matters is that we fight with honor until the end." But Varos lifted his gauntlet, and the behemoth outside roared in answer. Stones split, and the cavern rumbled. Kale shouted, "If he brings the mountain down, we're finished." Then Oralis shuddered in his hands. Images crashed into his mind. An ancient city blazing with light, knights in shining ranks, and the face of a woman he didn't know whispering, "Do not betray the choice." His eyes flew open. The sword blazed, silver light erupting into a shield that forced the iron wraiths back. Varos's laughter echoed like crashing engines. "See how the sword feeds on your fear? But how long will it sustain you?" Dareth forced out a bloody cough. "Kale, listen. Don't let him poison your heart. Varos wants you to believe you're a vessel, but the sword doesn't choose cowards. You survived the forest. You crossed the desert. You earned it." Kale's voice cracked. "I don't want to be chosen. I just want to live." Varos thundered closer, his massive blade raised. "Then give it to me, and I'll end your suffering." But before Kale could move, Dareth staggered forward with his last strength, driving a dagger into Varos's joint. Sparks flew uselessly, and Varos hurled him aside with one crushing blow. Kale screamed, falling to his knees beside the knight. "Dareth, no!" Through blood, Dareth smiled faintly. "Don't let the shadows break you, boy. The sword is yours, not mine." Varos bellowed. "Then you will both die." His arm lifted, but before the strike could fall, a sound rolled over the mountains. A deep metallic chorus. Horns, ancient and mechanical, blared across the peaks. Red and blue lights burned along the cliffs. Kyle looked up in shock. Shapes moved in the distance. Machines, dozens, marching in silent ranks. Not behemoths, not wraiths, but something older. Dareth whispered, almost reverently, "The Silent Wardens, remnants of the old world's guardians. They protect what must never be claimed." Kale's blood froze. This was no longer just a battle between three souls. The mountains themselves had awakened. Dareth grasped Kale's arm weakly. "Run, boy. The sword needs you. If you stay, you'll die here." But Kale felt fire ignite in his chest. He tightened his grip on Oralis, and the light burst brighter, blinding even the iron wraiths. He shouted through the blaze, "I'm not running. Not this time. I'll fight until the very end." And so began the darkest chapter of their journey. The Iron Mountains burned behind them. Kyle half-dragged, half-carried Dareth down the final slopes, until the land opened into a valley cloaked in mist. Rising at its heart was a fortress unlike any Kyle had ever seen. Velarin Keep, the last bastion of the fallen kingdom. It was not like the ruined cities of the plains, overgrown and broken. Velarin still stood. Vast black walls fused with glowing circuitry. Towers crowned with shards of crystal that pulsed faintly like beating hearts. It looked less like a castle, and more like some colossal machine designed to outlast eternity. Kyle stopped, awe washing over him. "It's still alive," Dareth coughed, leaning on him. "Not alive, but not dead." Velarin was built where magic and machine bled together. It was meant to guard the kingdom's heart. His gaze hardened. "If the sword chose you, boy, then this is where we'll know why." They crossed the mist-choked valley under silence, but Kale's nerves prickled. The ruins whispered. He felt eyes on him. Whether ghosts, machines, or both, he couldn't tell. By the time they reached the gates, Dareth was barely conscious. The gates themselves were towering slabs of black steel, etched with lines of glowing blue script. As Kale approached, Auralis pulsed in his hand. The runes flared, and the gates groaned open, revealing a vast courtyard filled with broken statues and shattered banners. Velarin was not empty. Figures emerged from the shadows, clad in remnants of armor, their bodies twisted with machinery, their faces pale as bone. They were neither alive nor dead, guardians trapped between eras. The eternal wardens, Dareth whispered. Once knights of Aegros, now bound to the keep. The wardens circled them silently. One stepped forward, its voice a rasp of steel on stone. The sword returns. Who bears it? Cael raised Auralis, though his hand trembled. I do. The warden tilted its head, the glow in its chest flickering. You are no knight. You are untested. I never asked for this, Cael snapped. But I fought the shadows. I crossed the desert. I faced the behemoths. I'm still standing. Isn't that enough? The wardens murmured, their voices like grinding gears. Finally, the leader spoke. Then you will be tested. Before Cael could answer, the sky split with sound. A thunderous roar rolled across the valley. From the mountains marched Varos's army of iron wraiths, flanked by forged behemoths. Behind them, Varos himself strode, his massive blade dragging sparks along the ground. The wardens raised their broken spears. The oath-bound traitor comes! Cael's stomach sank. They had barely escaped with their lives, and now Varos had brought a host of horrors against Valorin. Dareth, coughing blood, seized Cael's arm. Listen. The keep's heart, the sanctum of light, lies within the central tower. If you bring Auralis there, its true power will awaken. Only then can we stand against Varos. Cael's throat tightened. And if I can't? Then all is lost, Dareth said simply. His eyes burned with conviction. Go, I'll hold the line. Cael shook his head fiercely. You can't even stand. You'll die. Dareth managed a bloody grin. Knights of Aegros do not die hiding in towers. We die standing between the darkness and the light. Cael's chest ached. For the first time he realized Dareth was not just a relic of a lost order. He was the only family Cael had left. The gates of Valorin shuddered as Varos's army approached. The wardens raised their weapons. Cael's heart thundered. Go, boy, Dareth said, pushing him toward the tower. This is your fight now. The gates burst open in a storm of fire and shrieking steel. The courtyard erupted in battle. Wardens clashing with wraiths, behemoths tearing through the walls, and in the midst of it, Varos striding like a god of iron and shadow. Cael sprinted for the tower, dodging through the chaos. Auralis blazed in his hand, guiding him as arrows of light and bolts of plasma streaked overhead. He stumbled, nearly falling, but each time the sword pulled him forward, urging him on. At the base of the central tower, he skidded to a halt. A door of pure light barred his way, humming with immense energy. Behind him, Varos's voice roared. You cannot escape me, boy. That sword is mine. Cael turned, chest heaving as the iron giant strode into the courtyard, cutting down wardens like paper. The ground shook with each step. Cael raised Auralis, and for a heartbeat the entire keep seemed to pulse in answer. I'm done running, Cael whispered. Varos lifted his blade, fury blazing in his crimson eyes. The siege of Valorin had begun. The courtyard of Valorin Keep was fire and ruin. Wardens clashed with iron wraiths, sparks of steel and shards of bone flying through the mist. Forged behemoths tore down ancient towers, their roars echoing like collapsing thunder. And in the center of it all, Cael stood at the foot of the glowing door to the sanctum of light, Auralis blazing in his hands. Varos the Bound advanced, dragging his colossal blade, each step cracking the stone beneath him. His voice rang through the chaos, warped and furious. You cannot hide, boy. The sword is mine. I bled for it while you scavenged scraps in the dirt. Cael's arms trembled, the sword's light searing his skin. He glanced back at the door of radiant energy. It pulsed like a heartbeat, waiting. Dareth's voice echoed in his mind. Bring the sword to the sanctum. Only then will its true power awaken. But to reach it, he had to face Varos. The Knight of Iron lunged, his massive blade sweeping down like a falling tower. Kyle dove aside, the strike splitting the stone where he had stood. Sparks rained, the air trembling with the shock. Kale swung Oralis wildly, and the sword flared, beams of silver clashing against Varos's crimson energy. For a moment, light and shadow locked, searing the courtyard with blinding brilliance. Varos's laughter boomed. "You are a child playing knight. That weapon will consume you before it ever obeys you." Kyle staggered back, chest heaving, and in that instant, he saw Dareth, bloodied, barely standing, holding back a tide of wraiths with nothing but his broken shield. The knight's eyes met his, blazing with unyielding fire. "Kale," Dareth shouted, "you are not the boy you think you are. You are more. Prove it." The words struck deeper than Varos's blows. For so long Kale had believed himself worthless, an orphan, a thief, a stray. But Oralis had chosen him. The wardens had tested him, and Dareth had believed in him when no one else ever had. Kale clenched his teeth. "I'm not just a vessel. I'm Kale Thorn, and I'll never give this sword to you." Oralis roared to life, its silver blaze expanding until it encased Kale in a radiant halo. Varos snarled and charged, his mechanical arm whirring. Their blades collided in an explosion of light and metal. The ground split beneath them, and the keep trembled as if it, too, was deciding who to serve. Kale pushed forward, every muscle screaming, every wound burning. For a moment he thought he would break, but then Oralis spoke, not in words, but in pure light. He felt not alone, but surrounded. Voices of knights long gone, a chorus of courage. They lent him strength. With a final cry, Kyle drove Varos back, forcing him to his knees. The mask of steel cracked, revealing a glimpse of the scarred, furious man beneath. "You are nothing!" Varos spat, lunging again. Kyle didn't strike to kill. Instead he turned, thrusting Oralis into the door of light. The sanctum exploded. A wave of brilliance surged outward, blinding the battlefield. The wraiths shrieked and dissolved into ash. The behemoths collapsed, their cores extinguished. Even the eternal wardens froze in silence as the keep itself awakened. Varos roared, clawing at the ground as the light seared through him. His armor cracked, the machine parts tearing free. "No, I was the last. It should have been me." Kyle's voice rang steady, carried by the storm. "You were never the last knight. You abandoned the light. You chained yourself to shadow. This ends now." Oralis flared, and Varos was consumed, his cry echoing until it faded into nothing. Silence fell. The battle was over. Kale collapsed to his knees, trembling. The sword no longer burned but rested gently in his hands, warm, like a companion. The sanctum's glow softened, sealing itself once more. Through the smoke, Dareth staggered forward. He was broken, bloodied, but alive. He placed a hand on Kale's shoulder, pride in his eyes. "You did what no knight before you could. You saved the kingdom's heart." Kale shook his head, exhausted. "I'm no knight. I'm just me." Dareth's faint smile widened. "That is exactly why the sword chose you. Not for your name, not for your past, for your heart." The wardens knelt silently, their glow dimming in reverence. One spoke at last. "The boy has proven worthy. The light endures." Kyle looked down at Oralis. For the first time, he didn't feel like an orphan or an outcast. He felt whole. Above them dawn broke through the mist. The sun's light struck the shattered towers of Valarin Keep, and for the first time in a century the fortress glowed not with decay, but with hope. Kyle rose, helping Dareth to his feet. "What now?" The knight looked out over the ruined valley, his gaze steady. "Now we rebuild. The world has forgotten what courage looks like. You will remind them." Kyle swallowed, the weight of destiny heavy, but no longer unbearable. He tightened his grip on Oralis, its silver edge gleaming in the morning light. Together, boy and knight walked into the new day, and thus began the legend of Cale Thorn, the orphan who became the last light of Egros.